Everyone, we're letting the Zoom room fill up and we will start in just a minute. All right, Doug.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Broader Impacts of Research Conference. I understand there are over 200 people attending today and tomorrow, so that's a testament of how important this topic is. So the conference represents a strong partnership between the Office of Research and Innovation and the University Outreach and Engagement to provide the research impacts to support faculty and students. This is kind of a very critical topic. The public is really demanding that we, understand and justify why the significant investment in research is being made. And so I think broader impacts, although they're required by some agencies right now, I think it's in general a very critical effort that everyone should be in the research realm should be cognizant of and try to deliver. So the partnership in this case delivers combines our strengths in research facilitation with the outreach and engagement strengths in engaged scholarship. This makes MSU unique. I think most broader impact support is provided by one or the other. We've recently been our research portfolio has been expanding, and we have a very significant contribution from NSF funding to our research effort. And I think broader impacts for NSF is really essential. So that's, I think, again, indicates that we've taken this very seriously at MSU. So we've also had success in obtaining career awards. These are early investigator awards from NSF. And we've collaborated again between our two units to help those new faculty succeed. Our office offers a number of different grant proposal services, both grant writers who assemble complex proposals and grant editors who help refine and the grantsmanship of individual applications. There will be a handout, I think, available at some point during the conference that provides an outline of those services. It's also important that industry partners and collaborators are included in broader impacts. And so MSU Spartan Innovations, the Innovation Center, which includes all our tech transfer operations, Business Connect, which is a corporate sponsored research effort, and Spartan MSU Technologies, which is our intellectual property office. So all of those will help establish and support those kinds of collaborations, and they're important in broader impacts. So I think that's I'll sort of stop there and hand it over to Lori. I wish you all a very successful conference and hope you'll learn a lot. So thanks again.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for your partnership on this project that we've been engaged in over the past year, especially with the guidance of Miles McNall, Shobha Ramanan, Marianne Walker. Good morning, I'm Lori Van Egren. I'm the Interim Associate Provost for University Outreach and Engagement, and I want to welcome you all to this Broader Impacts event. And I can't tell you how pleased I am to see how many people are participating among our MSU faculty, staff, and students on this topic. As of yesterday, we had 227 people registered, and I imagine they'll be coming and going throughout this two-day set of events. Now, 5 years ago, in 2016, we held our very first large-scale BI event, and as many things do, it came out of happenstance. I had been writing for an NSF grant for the first time, and had to outline a proposal that would be judged on two criteria, the NSF criteria, intellectual merit or the science, which was something that I was perfectly familiar with, and something called broader impacts, which I had never heard of, but as it happened was also perfectly familiar with, but just under different language. I had been with university outreach and engagement for many years. It was my whole job, but simply had never encountered the language broader impacts, because broader impacts is specifically language of NSF. So this is termed lots of different things, this kind of work. NSF uses it as broader impacts. And one of the great things that NSF did was to institutionalize it into the proposal criteria so that people had to think about it as part of their research. Now, while MSU is less siloed than many places, it still does have silos. And this was a great example of how disciplinary differences can make a difference in what we know and what we understand amongst each other. So disciplines where NSF is a primary funder might use the term broader impacts almost exclusively. And those where NSF is not a primary funder tend to use lots of different other terms, but we're really all talking about the same set of things. And in UOE, across MSU as a whole, we talk about fulfilling our foundational land-grant mission of making a difference in society. And we do that through education and research and public access through engaged scholarship. Engaged scholarship is scholarship developed by enacting with communities, where community voice is sought and it's valued, where the work is driven by community identified needs, and where community and university partners expect mutual and reciprocal benefit, where we understand what the community needs and the community understands what we as academics might need. When we design our work as engaged, these engaged research and creative activities, engaged teaching and learning, engaged service, and engaged commercialized activities result in better designed and more impactful activities that are more likely to meet the needs of communities and the public. And in short, this becomes work that makes research even more meaningful and effective, or broadly impactful. So many common broader impacts activities, citizen science, science communication activities, K-12 curricula and programs, many of these fall under the umbrella of engaged scholarship, and they are key to fulfilling MSU's public impact mission. And since that time, we in UOE, and most recently in this innovative and unique partnership with the Office for the Vice President for Research and Innovation, have intentionally worked to build MSU's capacity to support broader impacts as part of our excellence in engaged scholarship. And I think the fantastic turnout here at this event represents the interest in MSU and among our faculty and staff and students to conduct important research that has a widespread impact on our local and global communities. So I will leave you with that, and it is now my great pleasure to introduce one of my great friends, Dr. Susan Reno, and who was there at that very first. She helped us kick off our very first BI conference 5 years ago, need to do math. In that time it was in person, and now she's able to attend virtually, and I'm still pleased she's able to do that. Dr. Susan Reno is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research, Extension, and Engagement at the University of Missouri. Susan is also an Assistant Professor of Strategic Communication in the School of Journalism at Missouri. She's also the Executive Director of the National Science Foundation funded Center for Advancing Research Impact in Society, or ARIS Center. And I'm imagining she's going to share how to get connected with ARIS as part of her talk. She received her master's and PhD in education from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and her bachelor's and master's in anthropology from the University of Missouri. Now, previously, Susan served as the principal investigator of the National Alliance for Broader Impacts. She is really the innovator in terms of national leadership for broader impacts. She has been a dynamic and vibrant advocate for broader impacts, and as we're reframing it to generalize beyond specific NSF language, we are moving toward calling it research and societal impacts. Now she's in the position of working directly with NSF to give input from the research community about developing and reviewing broader impacts, both implementing them and as part of the proposal process. And as I said, she was the inaugural speaker at our first BI workshop, in 2016. So I hope you will join me in welcoming my colleague and friend, Dr. Susan Reno.
Good morning, everyone. First thing I want to say is thank you, a whole bunch of thank yous. Thank you to Miles and Shoba and Marianne for inviting me. Thank you to Dr. Gage and Dr. Van Egren for supporting Michigan State's participation in the ORC program. And a very special thanks to my friend Lori, who has been part of the ARIS leadership team now for many years. So I appreciate all of you. And I actually really appreciate the ability to spend my morning talking about two of my favorite things, which of course is research impact and NSF's broader impacts. I know a lot of time when people start to share their screen, you think it's going to be a long, drawn out presentation. I promise I will keep us on schedule. And actually my presentation is going to be very brief and really to the point. It's going to talk about the title of my presentation, what are research impacts and broader impacts? Why do they matter? And then I'm going to wrap it up by giving you just a taste of why it is that this, I think, is important to you and how you can build your broader impacts identity. So what is research impact and why does it matter? Dr. Neil Lane was director of the National Science Foundation when the broader impacts criterion became part of the merit review process. And one of the things he said in 1997, and I think this is really important still today, public support for research must be earned. We can no longer expect it in the form of a blank check and an undefined agenda. It is now more vital than ever for us, the research community, to make a convincing case to the public about the tangible societal benefits that flow from science and technology. And in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about this vitality, this need to make the case that research benefits society. So Laura mentioned a few minutes ago that when you submit to the National Science Foundation, you're reviewed on two criteria: your intellectual merit, which is the science or the ability to advance your field, and the broader impact. And NSF defines broader impact as the benefit to society. And they look at it across 9 areas. Now, if you ask the National Science Board or the NSF, they will say that these are not the only ways that you can benefit society. But when you look at them, they are fairly, I think, comprehensive. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about these because I know that you're going to hear more about that later today. But I think it's important. Lori also mentioned some of the traditional things that we think of in terms of broader impacts, in terms of citizen science, working in the K-12 space, broadening participation. But I think it's also important that it also has to do with building the STEM workforce, partnerships between industry and academia, national security, economic competitiveness, and also enhanced infrastructure for research and education. And that's the way that NSF thinks about it. And that's particularly around broader impacts. But there are a lot of universities who are thinking about research impact. What's the impact of our research? And actually York University in Canada is a leader in this thought space, and they actually have a strategic framework for impact. And their definition of research impact is the effect it has beyond academia, when the knowledge generated by research contributes to, benefits, and influences society, culture, our environment, and the economy. I have a very simple definition. I always think of research impact, that impact is where research meets people. And I'm gonna give you a couple of examples, and they're both personal to me. People like my dad, who had a serious stroke 4 years ago and is now an amputee, who benefited greatly from advances in technology. From the dialysis machines that cleaned his blood when his kidney shut down, to the ventilator that breathed for him, to the stroke protocols and the therapy that helped him walk and get dressed and eat on his own, to the marvelous advances in artificial limb technology that help him walk on his own. He is a direct benefit of the work that we do. In fact, when I was in his hospital room with him, I remember thinking, I'm probably the only person here who is right now thinking that this is all a broader impact, that this is all the benefits of research. And I searched the NSF award database, and currently there are 9 awards that have to do with dialysis. There are more than 150 that have to do with artificial limbs. And around stroke and pulmonary and ventilators, there are more than 900 each, different awards that are trying to improve the process. I don't have to say a whole lot about what the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us about our need to communicate with the public and demonstrating our value. And I want to say that one of the things I like about this large graphic at the top that talks about how vaccines were developed so fast, it says advances in vaccine technology are built on the backs of many years of research. And I think that's one of the things about NSF Broader Impacts and NSF in general. NSF funds basic research that sometimes it's hard to see the immediate benefit right away. But we know that advances in technology and in research today come on the backs of basic research that's been going on for many years. And I want to say that one of the things about the COVID-19 virus and the pandemic is that it's very personal. This is a photo of my cousin Sandra, who passed away last year from COVID at the end of April. And so I think about the fact that all of us know someone who either has passed away from COVID or we know someone who has been affected by this. So what does this mean for you? We know sort of what Broader Impacts is. We know why it's important. It touches all of us. But what does this mean for you as a researcher? And what does it mean for you as a researcher beyond getting more funding? And I don't want to emphasize that, because it does help. You are not going to get funding from the NSF if you don't have strong Broader Impacts. But what else does it mean for you? When I talk about building the Broader Impacts identity, which I'll talk a little bit more in just a second about that, I always show this slide because I think sometimes people think of Broader Impacts as an add-on, as something else that you have to do in the midst of all the other things you have to do. And I always remind people that researchers are people too. They have bosses that they have to please. They have families, or they're part of families. They're in relationships. They have a lot of the same pressures that everybody else has, right? And usually when I show this slide, I have a cartoon picture of a researcher who's got 6 arms and they're juggling kids and trying to write an article and trying to do research and other things. And then I thought, I don't really need that. If I type in COVID life, this is what pops up. And this is what our lives are like. There's always something. For me, my kids are older, but that means I have a minivan full of backpacks and places that they have to go. And I'm trying to do my work and do my research and other things. So I don't want to tell you that Broader Impacts is an add-on. I don't want to make it a burden. What I want is to figure out how to help you make all of the spheres of influence, or all the places where you're working, work for you and with your research. So for us, the answer to that is building a Broader Impacts identity. And BI identity is something that was thought of by my good friend and colleague, Julie Rizzing at Oregon State. And I remember the first time I heard her say those words, and I thought, that's a thing we need to keep. That's so important. I get it. That makes sense to me. How do I build my Broader Impacts identity while I'm building my identity as a researcher? And as I think through what I want to accomplish with my research over my life, if I, in the same way, think about what do I want to accomplish with the outreach and engagement that I'm doing over the course of my career, right? So it moves the idea from doing outreach and engagement on a project level. So from project to project to doing engagement over a lifetime, it moves from a bunch of disparate activities to a program that allows you to have data and really get to impact. So how do you get started thinking about your own Broader Impacts identity? So really, I have a bunch of questions for you to think about. And the first is, what parts of your research do you really want to share? What are the parts of your research that you're really excited about? What are the things that you think are easy or easier to bring people into? And you may be thinking there's nothing. My research is so complicated, it's hard to do that. I think that's why it's important that NSF gives those really broad definitions of what counts as broader impacts, because in that space, NSF will tell you that your research can be the broader impacts by itself. Your broader impacts can be activities that are directly related to your research and are coming from it. And then if it's really that complicated, you can do any list of those other things that are helping move their societal goals forward. So you really are okay in that space. But what parts of your research do you really want to share? And what parts lend themselves to bringing in different publics? And then I always ask researchers, what are your favorite things to do? Because a lot of times, besides feeling like an add-on, broader impacts also seems like something that you don't want to do. Excuse me, or that you're going to be stuck doing something that you don't want to do, right? So for a lot of people, they feel like broader impacts is only doing K-12 outreach. You don't have to do that. You can use social media, you can work with older publics, you can work nowhere in the education space. You can do all kinds of things. And so what I want is for you to build a broader impacts program that's based on the things that you care about and the places that you're already investing in. And that's the third question. Where are you already working? Are you volunteering in your community? Are you at your kid's school? You know, I spend a lot of time in airports and I see a lot of BI all over in airports where universities are investing in advertising to talk about the benefits of their research. I spent a lot of time that year, a couple of years ago, in hospitals and in rehab centers and in nursing homes. And in fact, I was reading an article last night about how museums are doing museum outreach in nursing homes and taking museum objects out. So there are lots of places where you can plug into places where you're already investing. And then I think it's also important to rule out the things you don't like to do. I'm teaching a course on public engagement for graduate students this semester. And last week our class was on social media. I think that social media is one of the greatest ways that we can do broader impacts. And I am absolutely the worst at it. In fact, we're hiring some interns right now to work with Eris on our social media strategy because it's really important, but I don't have a lot of skills in that space. You don't have to do social media. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. So rule those things out from the beginning. And then the other thing is to make it fun. One of the things that happens when researchers come into my office to talk about their broader impacts, a lot of times they think, I'm going to tell them to do something that they're actually going to hate. And by the time we start working through their likes and their research, and I start hearing where they're already plugged in, and sometimes all we have to do is just reframe it. They think this is pretty great. Could be really fun. I'm actually looking forward to doing it. And as we know, when we do things that we enjoy, we're more likely to do them and do them well. So one of the things about me is that I call myself a BI tourist. Everywhere I go, I'm always looking for examples of broader impacts or research impact. So this weekend, we went to the Nelson Atkins Art Museum in Kansas City. And I came around the corner and there was this giant piece of art there, Research in a Growth Hormone. And it was made by Alfred Jensen in 1978. And one of the things that struck out to me right away was that it had the word research in this art installation. And a lot of times, well, honestly, it's the first time I've ever seen it. I can't say that I've ever seen it like written the way that it is. And so of course it caught my eye. And it reminds me that again, broader impacts can be art installations. They can be partnerships with museums. There are a lot of ways that you can build your broader impacts identity in a space that you really enjoy. So a few examples, because I think examples are fun. And these are some of my favorite people. So this person, Angela Speck, she is chair of physics and astronomy at UT San Antonio. She was formerly here at the University of Missouri. She is my favorite broader impacts identity example because Angela dyes her hair to match her outreach and engagement. 4 years ago when we had the total solar eclipse, she was the eclipse maven. She was on TV, she was on radio. She traveled our state getting teachers and students excited to do educational activities around it. They ran a summer camp in the few weeks before the eclipse to talk about storytelling in the eclipse, and she dyed her hair to match the corona of the eclipse. Angela has physics and astronomy clothes. You can see she had total eclipse shoes. You can't see it very well, but besides the total eclipse t-shirt she's wearing behind that table, she has a skirt that lights up and shows the different constellations. In addition to being a researcher, she also ran our observatory, and she and her graduate students hosted several outreach events every year. Every week, the observatory was open. In October, they did something called the Haunted Observatory, where the students and faculty dressed up like astronomers and told their stories so that kids could learn all about different astronomers. She did all this because this is the thing that she believes the most in, and she found a way to integrate her research and her broader impacts. She also was able to turn that into an NSF Career Award, which I think is really important. The other example I want to give you is Dr. Casey Holliday. He is in our School of Medicine. He's in the Department of Anatomy and Physiology, and Casey studies dinosaurs. For people in my life, he is responsible for turning my kids on to Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, and many, 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 many other kids, getting them excited about dinosaurs. And Casey has been really involved in public outreach for a long time. He was part of the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. And then when he came here, he started something called Dinosaurs and Cavemen, which was a STEM expo that was held at one of our local high schools in conjunction with their observatory, and allowed faculty, staff, and students to be able to interact with the public in lots of wonderful ways. And then the other thing that Casey does that I think is important is he does a lot with the media and the press. And so 2 years ago, there was a story that went viral all over the world about the fact that T-Rexes had air conditioning in their head. And I think it's really important, number one, that he does a lot of work with our news bureau and getting the stories out and working with the media. But he also worked with a graphic illustrator in the School of Medicine to create this wonderful image, like a thermal imaging of a T-Rex's head so that they could see the air conditioning working. And Casey does that because he believes in that. In fact, broader impacts and outreach are core components of a functioning lab. It's always been my charge to go out and work with the public. In fact, it was so important to him that when he went up for tenure, he asked for a letter of support from my office, which I happily gave because he's been so involved in this work. So that's my presentation for this morning. Some things for you to think about, to encourage you to be creative, to think about how you can integrate your research and your outreach and engagement. And then lastly, to thank you for being here and to invite you to do two things. One, every year, ARIS runs the ARIS Summit. This year, it's a joint workshop or joint conference between us and our colleagues in Canada, Research Impact Canada. And it focuses on public engagement at the intersection of workforce development. And it's March 10th through 12th. Of course, it's going to be virtual, so you can join in from Zoom, and the cost is really, really, really affordable. And then the other thing is to join ARIS. Membership in ARIS is free. We have a lot of great resources that are on our website, which is researchandsociety.org, and we'd be happy to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was terrific and a wonderful way to start this conference. I invite the audience now to put your questions in the Q&A function. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. And we have about 10 to 15 minutes to ask Susan some questions about broader impacts. It looks to me like we have 96 people in this session, so surely at least one of those 96 people has a question. Okay, here we go. They're starting to come in. All right, Susan, do you have any examples of students and what they have done for broader impacts?
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. So we have here on our campus, 2 student groups, actually 3 now, who decided to come together as graduate students and create their own programming. So one of them is Science on Wheels. And so we had a graduate student who really believed in taking the message of research out off campus and around our state. And so they partnered with our local extension office. And so they started off with a group of about 12 students who prepared about 5-minute TED Talks. They did storytelling training and science communication training before they went. And then they went all over the state. Our office provided some support for them along with extension to do that. That was 3 years ago. They're continuing on. Each of those graduate students, as they graduate, they get new leadership. And so we're really excited about that. And then we had a group of graduate students who put together something called Science on Tap. And I'm sure maybe you have something similar, where they made presentations at local brew houses around Columbia to talk about research. And then we have one other group that I just heard about that I thought was great. It's a group of sophomores here on our campus as undergraduates who lived together in the dorms as freshmen from all different disciplines, who came together and said they want to work with high school teachers around the state, particularly starting with their own high schools. Many of them are Missouri students, to build up their science clubs. And so they've been working with an organization, a national organization, to go out and do that. All those things were thought of by graduate students and run by graduate students with very little input from us.
Thanks, Susan. Now we have a question from Chelsea Harris. She says, thank you for your great talk. I'm an astrophysicist. I often worry that my broader impacts plans for NSF proposals aren't big enough or impressive enough, really, for astrophysics. Is there any truth to that?
So I would say
what
that.
Scale should I aim for?
Say that again.
What scale should I aim for?
That's a great question. And I think it's really important to bring it out because the people in my office know that I love to use this analogy. The average NSF grant is about $100,000. We're going to use some easy math. And on our campuses, we have different indirect rates, but indirect rates are about half, maybe a little bit more. So now we only have about this much money to work with. And then we hire a graduate student. And then we pay some summer salary. We do some research. Susan says you got to pay for the broader impact and evaluation. And there's not a whole lot of money left, right? And so I think the thing to remember about scale is how much money you have and what you can do with it. Because what you can do with a large scale center is very different than what you can do with an individual led research grant. So what I tell people is to not think about the number of activities or even the scale, but think about what's reasonable for your project, what can be accomplished by your team, and what is achievable as well as substantive. So I don't think it's substantive to say that in the life of a 3-year grant, you're going to give one talk at a high school, right? I also don't think it's achievable to say in the life of your grant that every week for 3 years, you're going to give a talk at a high school, unless you have some bigger scale. So I think it's being mindful of what you have and doing the best with what you can do with that.
All right, we have a question from Sherry Dan. Hi, Sherry. I just took an NSF grant training workshop and was informed that intellectual merit has been reframed and renamed. Can you comment on this and its relationship to BI?
I will tell you that I have not heard that. So I actually would like to know more about that from you because I've not heard that. I've heard some conversations about whether or not we're going to keep broader impacts as broader impacts and whether we might change that. But that was just some random discussion, not anything substantive. So no, I have not heard anything about that.
All right, thank you. And Sherry, if you have any more information about that, perhaps you could put that in the chat. Another question, are you aware of BI aimed at geriatric populations?
Yes. So I just mentioned earlier a study that they did outside Boston with museums taking traveling exhibits to different nursing homes here on our campus, we have a class called Public Understanding of Science, and it was for graduate students and designed to help them understand the relationship between the publics, different publics and researchers, but also the goal of that class was for them to create an outreach activity designed for nursing homes. And so, yes, we've seen lots of people do that. The best one I have is the museum example, but I'm sure that there are many others. The other thing I guess I would also mention is that we are a campus with an Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and I know that there are many of those around the United States. There's a lot of our older populations who take courses through that, and that's another way that people have targeted them.
All right, thank you. And relevant to Sherry's earlier question, she says that the new framing is expected significance.
I will do some digging into that and find out. I have some people I can ask about that.
All right, and apologies to everyone if I mispronounce your name. I think this question is coming from Jonathan Choti. I see that BI focuses on STEM. Is there a good reason why the arts and humanities are de-emphasized in BI?
That's a really good question. So I think it's interesting that the NSF, when you look at those 9 areas of broader impacts, they focus on STEM directly, but I think that's because a lot of the work that they do is focused in that area, although not all. And that's one of the reasons why when we put in for our national center, it wasn't the Center for Advancing Broader Impacts in Society, it was a research impacts, because we think it's important to expand to all disciplines because all disciplines are relevant in this conversation, and also beyond NSF. But I think that's why. I think it's because so many of their research areas are around STEM. And that's also the charge they get from the National Science Board. So if you look at Vision 2030, which is their new visioning document for the next 9 years, it talks about the STEM workforce, it talks about the missing millions. So I think that that's their vernacular.
All right, here's a question from an anonymous attendee. Are there ways to do BI anonymously, or does your personal name have to be front and center?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that question, but I would say that you could do that. It would take a lot of work in terms of if you're going to do something in a public space, to not have your lab associated with it or your name associated with it might be a little problematic, but you could. The way I think about that is in terms of social media. I never like to be recorded. I never like to be the speaker on the video, but I really want to be the person who's contributing to the information. So I think that there are many ways that you contribute to a broader impacts project or an activity without having to be the main person or have your name on it.
All right, thank you. Here's a question from Daniel Woldring. Excellent talk, very thought-provoking. You included great examples of BI with students. Can you please comment on additional examples that may involve older or adult audiences? And I think you just touched on that with the question about geriatric audiences. Anything else to add?
I would say that one of the things about NSF that I love is that they have the most broad definition of underrepresented in STEM. And like I said before, those 9 ideas are just suggestion areas. You don't have to do them. What I've seen with NSF is that if you can come up with a population that you can make a real case for that is underrepresented or marginalized or would benefit from programming, and you can show some evidence for that, they are very open to hearing innovative and creative ways to address BI.
All right. This question comes from Jalili. Can the publics who are the potential beneficiaries of our research be envisioned as our public impact identity?
That's an interesting question. I would say yes, but I think you have to say more about that. I think you would have to talk about what does that mean? How are you going to move that forward with the BI? Like, how does that impact the decisions you're making and the programming or the activities that you're doing? So I think it could be the beginning and foundation, but you'd have to talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, Jalila, if you want to, maybe you could expand on that question in the chat and we can come back to it. Here's another question from an anonymous attendee. How important is it to develop a novel BI mechanism that you, quote, own, unquote, versus dovetailing with existing BI efforts at your university?
That's a great question. And the first 5 or 6 years of my work in the space, we dealt with this a lot until NSF actually put something into the PAPG. So if you read the proposal guide, it says you can leverage existing resources or you can create something new and innovative. And that was really important because a lot of times we know that panel reviews, each one is different and each one has a different flavor. And so we would have researchers who would put in existing programming that they've been doing for a long time that has a history and an evidence base of impact, and people would love it. They would submit that again for another proposal and the panel would say, this is not unique and innovative, we're not funding this. And then on the flip side, we would have particularly young investigators, early career investigators who would come up with something amazing and new. And the panel would come back and say, there's no evidence base for this. And so one of the things we said to NSF was this causes a lot of frustration with researchers because on one hand, they're trying to be unique and innovative and do something different, but then that's not valued. And on the flip side, they're trying to continue something that's been proven to work, and that's not valued. And so NSF says you can do either one. What I would say is if you're going to do something unique and innovative, and I encourage that all the time, think of something different, have an evidence base for that. Have a reason why you chose this audience, why you chose this mechanism. Even if there's not a whole lot of research out there, this is why I did that, and make the case so that they understand it. If you're going to leverage something existing, which is also a great way to help with your budget, talk about what is going to be different in this program because of the funding that you have. How are you improving it? How are you making it better?
Great. The next question is about BI identity. Susan, I love that you said we should find our BI identity, but I sense that in reality, some forms of BI are more valued than others by the many people who evaluate us. What's your wisdom in meeting others' expectations while being true to our own BI identity?
That is a very wise question because I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Every panel is different. And one of the things that I've been saying to NSF for multiple years now, and we're talking through this and I see lots of movement in this space, is that a lot of times panels review not what is in front of them, but what they wish was in front of them. And that's very frustrating because you put a lot of effort into something and you may have someone on your panel who thinks you have to do broadening participation. And if they don't see it, they're going to ding it. Well, unless there's a specific mechanism within that call that you have to add broadening participation is just one of many ways that you can do broader impacts currently. Same thing is true for K-12 outreach. If you do something with high school teachers and you didn't do something that they really think was important to their project, they may ding you for that. And so I think the way that I try to get around that is I try to be very clear in the writing of the broader impacts. Here's my goal. Here's my activities that are going to meet that goal. And here's my evaluation for how I know that's successful. And then what I do last is I look at it and I say, okay, where are the holes? What is a question that a reviewer might have that I may not have answered here well enough? And so I try to anticipate what it is they're going to ask questions about and answer it head on. I will say that works most of the time, not all the time. But if you look at the new guidance that came from the National Science Board at their last meeting just a few weeks ago, they know that the BI criterion is being applied unevenly across the foundation. And so there's two things that they're doing to combat that. One is they just mandated all reviewers who are going to be on panel review have to have training. and that includes implicit bias and broader impacts training. And then the other thing that's happening is there will now be a BI expert on every committee of visitors, who are the people who evaluate the directorates. And so I think that's going to be really important to leveling that playing field.
All right, I think we have time for 2 more questions. One comes from Justin Booth. Other than social media, what other technologies have proven helpful to researchers to promote broader impacts?
I think one of my favorite things that has been fun to watch, and I would like to see the cost come down so it's more affordable for researchers, is gaming technology. If you have kids who are any age, you pretty much know that they want to be on Minecraft or they want to be gaming. And that is a really great way to get people getting people into that. It's very costly. And so it's very hard for individual researchers to be able to afford to pay those kind of fees for that development. But I think that that's innovative and fun. Of course, citizen science is a great way to get people involved in your work, and in a way that I think honors the contributions of the public. Of course, anything that has to do with K-12, I think that's fun. So those are kind of some of my suggestions in terms of technology. The other thing is that the virtual world has opened up many possibilities. So several of our researchers on campus who have NSF grants who ran summer camps made them virtual starting last summer. And that allows many people from different areas to be able to participate.
Okay, here's an intriguing question. BI includes national security. Can this be done anonymously?
That's a great question. I will say that I don't even think that I have worked on a project that used national security as their broader impact. Most of the people who are doing that are anonymous and don't really tell people that they're doing that very often. So I would say most of the time, what I would say is you might put that in your proposal, but your BI probably will meet some other goal. And I would say that probably also refers to the research itself. And I would make that case.
And one final question from Ande Maharaj. For early career folks, how can we make our BI profiles stand out and write a competitive BI section? I think that's a really great general question.
It is. Because for early career folks, sometimes it's a toss-up, right? You hear, don't spend a lot of time on engagement till you get tenure. Then you have people like Angela and Casey who came in and said, I'm doing this. This is part of who I am as a researcher, so I'm going to make it work. I think the way that you make your BI profile stand out is, again, to build your individual BI identity, to find that thing that you really, really want to do, that you enjoy doing, that you can get your whole lab involved in. And I think that's something we didn't talk about a whole lot, but involving graduate students in the BI work. NSF loves it when you involve graduate students in your outreach work because you're giving them additional training that they need. And it's good for your whole team. And then I think anything you can do to get that started now so that you have some preliminary data to say, we've been doing this work and here's the impact it's had, and now I want to build on that. So yes, I would say building your BI identity is the way to do that. And again, to think about things that are unique and innovative to you and that makes sense so that when they read it, you always want your panelists to say, man, that's amazing. I wish I'd thought of that. Or that's really cool. And this team is really well positioned to go after that and do it.
All right. That's all of our questions. We got to all of them. Thank you so much, Susan, for coming and being our keynote speaker. We really appreciate it. That was terrific. And again, a great way to start the conference off.
It was my pleasure and best wishes to you all.
All right, we are going to transition now to my talk, the nuts and bolts of broader impacts. It'll take me just a few minutes to get my slides set up. So if you want to take a 2-minute bio break, please do that while I get ready. All right, Julie, can you confirm that you see presenter view for my slides?
Yes, I do.
Great. Since I promised a bio break, I'm going to wait another minute. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Miles McNall. I'm the Director for Community Engaged Research at the Office of Public Engagement and Scholarship and University Outreach and Engagement at MSU. And my talk is the nuts and bolts of designing your BI plan, or essentially what are the core elements of your BI plan and how they relate to this conference. So in this short talk, I have two goals. Give a brief overview of the key elements of a broader impacts plan for your next proposal, as well as showing you how the sessions in this conference and workshop on May 10th are connected to those elements. So here are what I think of as the core elements of the sound broader impacts plan. You don't have to do these in any necessary sequence. You can start with goals, audiences, settings, partners, or activities. Because of my background as a program evaluator, however, I like to start with goals. So in terms of BI goals, what impacts do you want your research to have? And when thinking about audiences or populations, who do you hope to reach with your BI activities? Settings and partners, who will you need to partner with to reach your intended audience? And where will your BI activity take place? And in terms of activities, what are you going to do with your audience? For budgets, how much money should you allocate to your BI activity and evaluation? And for the evaluation, how will you assess the broader impacts of your research? In other words, how will you know they have occurred? So this conference really focuses on the first four of those 6 elements and highlights the rich array of resources and partners available at MSU to connect your research with various audiences through innovative activities. In a 2-hour workshop on May 10th from 1 to 3 p.m., we will cover all 6 elements of a BI plan, including budgets and evaluation. My colleagues from the Office of Research Facilitation, Marianne Walker and Shobha Ramanand, and I will be conducting the workshop on May 10th. Here's the link for signing up for that May 10th workshop. Go to engage.msu.edu/learn/faculty. So today in session 3, we're going to be focusing on the broader impacts goal of increasing the participation of underrepresented groups in STEM education and careers. And then in sessions 3 through 6, we will showcase the resources and partners available at MSU to connect your research with appropriate audiences, partners, and settings. And here's a quick overview of the conference program. So after this session at 11 o'clock, we're going to have a terrific NSF Career Award panel. At 1 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to do a deep dive into broadening participation in STEM and the resources available on campus to support that broader impacts goal. And then tomorrow, we'll start the day off at 9 o'clock by looking at all of the different potential partners there are on the MSU campus for engaging the public in science. At 11 o'clock tomorrow, we're going to do a session on supports for partnership with industry. And then at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, we'll be looking at successful strategies for partnerships with nonprofits and government. So let's spend a little time now exploring the 6 elements of a BI plan, starting with your BI goals or the impacts you want your research to have on society. So Susan already talked about these NSFBI goals. Let's go through them quickly because I want to poll you on them in just a second. So there are 9 of these. They were developed by the National Alliance for Broader Impacts, now ARIS, and they include full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in STEM, also known as broadening participation, improved STEM education and educator development at any level, increased public scientific literacy and public engagement with science and technology, the improved well-being of individuals in society, the development of a diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce, increased partnerships between academia, industry, and others, improved national security, increased economic competitiveness, and enhanced infrastructure for research and education. So you can see that these broader impacts goals are in fact very broad, but they are not exhaustive of all the things you can do for your broader impacts activities. So let's do a quick poll. Define what your broader impact goals are. So pick as many of these as you think you are likely to pursue. And wait for a few more votes to come in. Okay, it looks like we have, oh, some folks are still, okay. And here are the results. Very interesting. One of the things I think is really interesting is how broad-based these different goals are. So obviously, broadening participation came out on top with 66% intending to improve that, but we've also got increased public scientific literacy and public engagement, close behind, improved well-beings of individuals in society, increased partnerships between academia, industry, and others, and just a few for improved national security and increased economic competitiveness of the United States. So thank you, that's very interesting. All right. So Susan mentioned Julian Rizian earlier when she was talking about impact identity. And Rizian and Storksteek in their 2018 article argued that a researcher really maximizes their ability to achieve broader impacts when they have articulated their impact identity, defined their impact goals, developed a long-term plan to achieve them, and also have the necessary supports and resources to carry those activities out. So let's take a closer look at this concept of impact identity. As Susan argued, the potential for a researcher to achieve broader impacts is really enhanced through the thoughtful consideration and integration of several elements of their identity and context, which is known as impact identity. So impact identity is located where the driving questions of your discipline and your own scholarship intersect with urgent societal needs. It's located where those questions and needs intersect with your personal preferences for audiences and activities. What kind of audiences do you like to interact with? Children or adults? And what kinds of broader impact activities do you find personally rewarding? Remember how strongly Susan emphasized the broader impact activities should be fun, not just for your audience, but for you. Capacities and skills are another important part of your impact identity. What special talents or skills do you possess that will enable you to achieve broader impacts? Are you an especially effective science communicator? Are you skilled at creating hands-on activities that demonstrate key scientific principles? Are you more skilled working with children or adults? Do you have experience working with certain underrepresented groups? And if you don't have a capacity or skill that is necessary for the BI activity you envision, who can you partner with on campus who does? The institutional context in which you operate is another key component of your impact identity. So to what extent does it provide a supportive environment for developing the societal impacts of your research? And I hope you will agree after attending the sessions in this conference that there are many different forms of support available at this institution for BI activities. So together, these elements contribute to your impact identity and the broader impacts of your research on society. Finally, in thinking about your impact identity, it's really important to think about the long game, not just your next proposal, or where you expect your career to be in 5 years, but where you hope it will be in 25 years. Ask yourself now, what will my impact legacy be? And what is my plan for getting there? And in the May 10th workshop, we will devote more time to helping you articulate your impact identity and long-term impact plan. So as Susan mentioned, one especially common and particularly important BI goal is broadening participation. So as we all know, the problem is that non-dominant populations in the US have been significantly underrepresented in STEM academics, professions, and also civic decision-making around STEM. And the goal is the full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minoritized groups in STEM. I am reconsidering this third bullet point because of what Susan said earlier, and she's in a better position to know because she's better connected to NSF than I am. I have seen it so common that I thought it might be a risk not to include some element of broadening participation in your NSF proposal. I'm not so sure of that right now, so don't quote me on that. And in thinking about broadening participation, it's really not enough simply to increase access to existing STEM opportunities, because STEM opportunities designed for dominant cultural populations may not be entirely appropriate for certain underrepresented groups. So therefore, it's important to work with partners and intended participants as well to make sure you're designing culturally responsive STEM opportunities. And here's a citation for a great resource to help you explore that concept more. And of course, my slides are available on the conference website, so you can go and look at all of the references. So in session 3 this afternoon at 1 p.m., you will learn about the many partners, programs, organizations, and resources available at MSU to help you pursue your broadening participation goal. And if you just look at this list, you can see, it's almost an embarrassment of riches here at MSU in terms of that. So moving on to the second element, audiences, given your desired impacts. So you've thought about what your impact goal is, and we saw from the poll that there range across all of those 9 goal areas. What audiences or populations will you need to engage to achieve them? There are many audiences or populations you might engage to achieve your broader impacts. Here are just a few. You could probably think of others as well. So I'd like to do another poll real quick to find out what audiences are you most interested in engaging in your BI activities. All right, we'll wait just a few more seconds. We're at 73%, and that's looks like where we're stopping. Okay, let's end the poll. All right, so in the lead is underrepresented in STEM populations, which makes sense because broadening participation was the #1 broader impacts goal. So that's completely consistent with that, followed by 62% intend to reach out to the general public, followed by K-12 students. We've also got K-12 teachers, policymakers, good, industry. So really across all of those different types of audiences. And if you have other audiences in mind, please put those in the chat. Okay. Let's close this. All right. So one thing to think about when considering your BI audience or population or publics, is the language that Susan uses, is how comfortable or competent you feel in working with them. So when you think about these different groups that are listed here, how comfortable do you feel working with K-12 students or teachers, minoritized or historically marginalized groups, members of the general public, business leaders, policymakers? Because that'll inform your decision about what audiences you're going to work with. And if you lack experience working successfully with the target audience, but you would like to work with that target audience, there are lots of places to go on this campus for help. So you can come to my office, University Outreach and Engagement. And that's really what we do is connect researchers with communities. But we're not the only ones who do it. So does K-12 Outreach in College of Education. So does MSU Extension, which of course connects to communities throughout Michigan. The MSU Innovation Center is a great place to go to connect with industry. IPSR provides resources for connecting and working with policymakers. And of course, you can always go to faculty or staff with prior experience in working with certain audiences or populations. So next, let's think about that third element, your BI partners. Who will you partner with to design and implement your BI activities? So the partners you select really depends entirely on the audiences or populations you are trying to reach, and what are the best settings for reaching them. So here's a pop quiz. Who is the BI partner in the picture? Open up the chat and see if anybody knows what that is or who this partner is. Okay, we've got observatory, planetarium, the museum. Aaron Reifler's got it. He was the first. And then Sadia Shankar was more specific. That's Science on a Sphere at the MSU Museum. Right. So yes, the MS Museum is one potential great partner for connecting with a wide variety of audiences. And so here is a sample, just a sample of some of your BI potential MSU connectors and partners. There are many, many more. So if you look at the column that says offices supporting engagement and research centers, you will find MSU staff who can help connect you with specific audiences and populations. So for example, if you're interested in working with Latinx populations in the Midwest, then the Julian Zamora Research Institute is the place to go. If you're looking to connect with tribal communities, then obviously the Native American Institute is the place to go. And then if you go to the next column for design spaces and science media, you find settings for connecting to a huge range of audiences of various ages and backgrounds. But as I said, this is not a complete list. If you want a more complete list, we have that under the Broader Impacts Resources section on the University Outreach and Engagement website. You see the arrow pointing to the bullet point, connect with potential MSU partners. Click on that and you can find many resources. So the way to get there is to go to engage.msu.edu, click on ways to engage at the top, and then click on Broader Impacts Resources. So now let's consider where you will likely engage with your target audiences or populations. In other words, the setting. So as this graph shows, throughout a person's lifetime, less than 1/3 of their science learning will occur in formal science education settings. Most of their science learning, in fact, will occur in informal learning environments, such as museums, science centers, etc. Informal science education settings are one of the most common settings for BI activities. And as this table shows, compared to formal science education settings, informal settings are really quite varied. And there are three main categories of them. There are designed spaces like museums and science centers and aquariums. There are programs for science learning such as citizen science, library programs, and making and tinkering groups. And of course, science media. And Susan put a great emphasis on science media. So as we saw earlier in the section on partners, MSU checks nearly all the boxes on ISE settings. If you're thinking about conducting your BI activities in formal K-12 education settings, it's really important to take a few things into consideration if you're thinking about doing it. First of all, be aware of the burden on area K-12 schools. So we know that, for example, the Lansing Area School District is often inundated with requests from researchers to partner on BI activities. And so to reduce that burden, we like to recommend to build on existing K-12 partnerships. Find out who is already working with K-12 schools in the area and see how you can get involved. Also, when you approach schools, demonstrate that you understand their world by having some knowledge of the K-12 STEM learning standards, for example, the next generation science standards. If you're working with K-12 teachers, show that you understand best practices for teacher professional development, and also that you know your student audience. You understand their backgrounds and understand how to effectively interact with them. A few more challenges are that many scientists lack training and experience in K-12 pedagogy, classroom management, or how to communicate with younger audiences. Teachers and curricula and lesson plans are often scheduled far in advance, and so it can be tricky to try to integrate your BI activity with that. And also, as we all know, teachers' performance appraisals are linked to student achievement on standardized tests, i.e. teaching the test. So that creates another challenge for building your BI activities into their lesson plan. So again, the solution here, I think, is to find STEM education faculty with experience in K-12 settings to advise or partner with you. And this is, in fact, one of the great strengths of MSU is our K-12 STEM education. So one hugely popular informal education setting for K-12 audiences is MSU's summer pre-college programming for youth, which unfortunately we were not able to do last summer, nor this summer. And you can see many of the examples, which I fully expect will come back online at some point. And you can find out more about them by going to the Spartan Youth Program's website. And my apologies to engineering for stealing their photo from their website to show an example. I just love this particular example. And then, of course, science communication is another hugely popular and formal science education setting, and it occurs across a vast array of media, reaching audiences in nearly every demographic, from young children to seniors. Some examples are in print, Scientific American or the New York Times Science Supplement, on NPR, Science Friday or Hidden Brain, PBS's Nova and Nature, and the internet, as you know, has so much on it. And podcasts around science have just absolutely blown up in the last couple of years. So we'd like to hear from you in the chat. Please tell us, what are some of your favorite science communication channels for yourself or your kids? All right, I see Twitter. What else? Newspaper articles. The conversation, yes, conversation's excellent. Radiolab, I love Radiolab. Minute Physics channel on YouTube, I haven't seen that. Infographics. All right. All right, well, thank you for that. So as you might expect, there are many wonderful SciComm resources available at MSU if that's going to be one of your ways of doing broader impacts. AgBio Research has a website devoted to science communication resources. MSU Libraries has put together a science communications guide. There's the great MSU SciComm student organization, and I believe they're having a conference very soon. Dave Paulson, who's going to be speaking in session 4 tomorrow, really specializes in environmental journalism and science communication around the environment. MSU Com has the University Communications Toolbox, and of course, WKIR has really stepped up during the pandemic around at-home learning for K-12 kids. And of course, we have Serving Up Science hosted by Cheryl Kirschenbaum, and that's just a small sampling of everything that WKAR does. So moving on to element 4, your BI activity. So given your goals, audiences, population, settings, and partners, what are you going to do together? And given the vast universe of potential BI activities you could do, I can't possibly go through a list. I can only give you some general advice about their characteristics and point you to places to look for examples. So the online BI wizard, which we'll discuss later, has many such examples. The one point I want to stress is whatever you decide to do should be decided in collaboration with your partners. So Susan essentially made these points already, and probably better than I will. Your BI activity should be meaningfully connected to your research rather than appearing to be tacked on. Like your research, your BI activities should be innovative. They should have a measurable impact on your audiences, and they, again, should be fun for you, your partners, and your audiences. So if you're still unsure of what kind of BI activity you're going to pursue, so this resource might help you at least identify a broad domain of activity. These 12 main domains of public engagement come from Elise Auerbach and her colleagues at the Center for Academic Innovation at the University of Michigan. They really sort of cover the gamut of many of the different and very popular forms of BI activity. Again, this is available in my slides on the conference website so that you have some time to take a look at it. And then if you go to the Broader Impacts Resources page on the UOE website, you'll find a couple of compendia of examples of broader impacts activities. And as I said, the BI Wizard provides many, many examples too. So at this point, we've covered the first 4 elements of a solid BI plan. We've talked about goals, we've talked about audiences, settings and partners, and activities. Now I'd like to briefly touch on budgets and evaluation. We'll go into more depth in the May 10th workshop and offer some tips from the experts on writing a great BI plan. So first, with regard to your budget. Simple advice here is be sure to devote sufficient resources to your BI activities. So if a reviewer looks at the scientific component of your proposal, they're going to be looking at the budget very closely to see whether you've adequately funded your research activities. They're going to do the same thing for your BI plan, right? So if you've underfunded your BI plan, they're not going to take it seriously, and they're not going to think that you're serious about your BI activity. So make sure you devote sufficient resources, and McFadden's advice is about 8 to 10% of the direct overall costs. Every NSF proposal must include a plan for the evaluation of your BI activities. Your evaluation should be able to answer the following questions. Was it successful? Was the activity valuable for your audience? And how did your audience change? And again, if you go to the Broader Impacts Wizard, it provides some guidance around developing a broader impacts plan. You also should have received a resource sheet with many evaluation resources. But I would say that I am also an evaluation resource for you. I've been helping several faculty with the evaluation plans for their broader impacts plans. And I've been doing evaluation for 20 years. I am also the coordinator of the MSU Evaluators Network. So if I can't help you with your evaluation plan, I can find others on or off campus who can help you with that. So some general tips about creating a great BI plan. First, it should be developed concurrently with and integrated into the research plan instead of hastily tacked on at the end. The BI language, your description of your BI plan, should be unique to the proposed research plan instead of recycled boilerplate BI language. I've actually had people ask me for BI boilerplate language, and I assure you there is no such thing. It really has to be meaningfully connected to the research you're doing. Reviewers will look on your BI plan more favorably if it's clear that your partnerships and partners are already in place rather than something that's been hastily arranged at the last minute. They'll view your BI plan more favorably if it's clear that you're not simply outsourcing your BI activity to some other entity. And also they will be looking for whether or not BI leads have prior experience. And so the last thing I want to do is really direct, and I've already mentioned one of these, is direct you to 2 great BI resources which you should go look at as soon as possible. And one is the Broader Impacts Guiding Principles and Questions for National Science Foundation Proposals. Now, originally this thing was written to assist and provide guidance to reviewers in evaluating the BI components of NSF proposals. But it's also incredibly valuable for proposers. If you're writing a proposal, it's always good to know what criteria reviewers are using to evaluate it. And this can be downloaded from the ERIS website, which is researchandsociety.org. So I suggest going there and checking that out. And the other thing is the BI Wizard, which is a website that will actually help you draft a BI plan. So here you can access the BI Wizard in the same place from the ERIS website, researchandsociety.org. I recommend everyone check it out. It's in its second iteration, and I think it's a much more powerful tool than the first version was. And then if you need assistance with your BI plan, you have several resources to turn to at MSU. Of course, in your college, you have your associate deans for research. You have college research administrators. You have my wonderful colleagues in the Office of Research Facilitation and Dissemination to help you. You have my office, University Outreach and Engagement. And so we hope to see you at the May 10th workshop, which will dive a little more deeply into all of this. So just quickly, what's coming up in the remainder of the conference today. We'll have a break here in a bit, and then at 11 o'clock, the NSF Career Award panel. That's going to be terrific. I think you'll learn a lot about how to put together a successful career award proposal for that. Then we break for lunch, and at 1 o'clock, we're back for a session on broadening participation in STEM resources and potential partners. And here is my contact information. And then in my slides, I also provided the references so that you could look them up yourself. And let's see if we have any questions. We have a few minutes. Okay, so this is from Tian Guo. Thank you for the talk. A lot of useful and practical information. This may be a little bit tricky, but do Asians, or more specifically Eastern Asian, count as underrepresented minorities in STEM? I think that's an excellent question. I think it's discipline specific. So Tian, I would ask yourself, if I look around me, are East Asians underrepresented in my particular field? And if the answer is no, then no, they would not be considered an underrepresented group. Okay, the next question is, how do we have prior experience orchestrating BI if we are early career researchers? Good question. I think it's nice but not necessary situation. So it's not absolutely necessary to have prior experience. I think what it really depends on how your BI plan is going to be viewed is, does it make sense? Is it well thought through? I would go straight to that NABI guiding principles document. That'll step you through all of the kinds of tough questions that a reviewer are going to ask about your BI plan. And is it adequately funded, and do you have a good evaluation plan? Okay. Daniel Woldring, thank you for sharing your experiences and insight with us. There is a lot of useful content here. Did you say these slides are also available online? Well, yes. If you go to the conference website, which you can get to by going to the UOE page and clicking on, just a second. Let me provide you with accurate information about this. I am going to put the link in the chat for the broader impacts resources. Okay. Here you go. So that gets you to all of the BI resources, as well as the conference website, which is sort of the last item on the broader impacts resources list. Okay. Next question, you mentioned the 6 elements of a BI plan can be developed in any order, but is there a better or worse order in which to explain them in your proposal? I would say no. I don't think there is a particular order as long as you touch on all of them. And as confirmation that there's no necessary order, the Broader Impacts Wizard, which was created by people who are a lot more knowledgeable in BI than I am, also has no particular order. I think it's just important that all of the elements are in there. I like to start with goals, because then I can say, here's my goal, here's the activity I'm going to do to achieve that goal. Here's the evaluation plan that's going to help me assess whether or not I've achieved that goal. And here are the audiences and partners I'm going to work with. Okay. Mary Ann, do you want to jump in here for the Q&A? All right, the next question is, can we use the Community Engagement Certificate and these workshop conferences to show training instead of experience if we're trying to do something? Absolutely, I think that is very relevant training and experience. Okay, Chelsea Harris, increasing retention of undergrad and grad students in STEM majors, i.e. but improving our work culture, seems like a way to increase diversity in the STEM workforce. But I don't see those students listed as an example audience. Yeah, no, they most definitely are an example audience. So sorry for not including that. From Antonio Arcastilla, for those without experience teaching K-12 audiences, what is the best strategy to get into this knowledge before including K-12 activities as a BI goal? And I think the answer there is to find out who on campus is doing that kind of work. And one great place to find the answer to that is to reach out to people like Marianne Walker in the Office of Research Facilitation to find out who's got funded research working with K-12 audiences. Okay. I don't see any other questions, and we are slightly over time. All right. So if there are no further questions, thank you for attending this morning's session. We hope to see you back at 11 o'clock for what I think is going to be a terrific session that's devoted to career awards. And I am going to close out the session now.